Hi, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri Appellate attorney and a guy who likes to make the law make sense on YouTube. Today, let's talk about the closing arguments in the Travis Rudolph case, and we'll go through a little bit of both of them, and then we'll discuss what I hope happens in this case. So stick around, we'll talk about this down at the beach. There is a dictum that many attorneys live by that says, a confused mind always says no. And that's at the heart of the approach that is taken by the defense in this case. And I think there is a belief if you get up and just pound the table because you benefit from being representing the state and the people, so to speak, that as a prosecutor, all you have to do is throw enough stuff up there to make a really emotional closing argument and then you win. That really isn't the way that it works. And jurors tend to pay very close attention both to the evidence that's presented as well as to what evidence each party focuses on at the end of the case. And I think they also pay attention to style, although that's less important. Style is only important to the extent that it assists in getting the message across. Now, if you ask me, I think the state in this case was way over its skis. They did not realize they had as many problems with this case as they very clearly did have. And I don't think it really came to the forefront here until they got to trial, and then they realized, oh man, we are in over our head.
This case has never been about domestic violence between Mr. Rudolph and his girlfriend. This case has never been about domestic violence. So we spent a lot of time talking about the anatomy of this relationship and what was going on that day. But this case comes down to something very important. Murder begins where self-defense ends.
Well, a really good way to lose credibility right at the very beginning of your closing argument is to say that the case is not about domestic violence. There is a tendency in the country to think about domestic violence as always being male on female. But when you get right down to it, the Johnny Depp trial, if it did nothing else, showed that women can sometimes inflict a lot of violence on their men as well. And there is video in this case that very clearly demonstrates that the woman in this case, Dominique, or as one of the YouTube commenters has said, referred to her as Dramanique, I think it's very clear that she's involved in this, right? So to say that it doesn't begin to even touch the surface of domestic violence, that's just a complete and utter falsification, and you are immediately losing credibility points with the jury when you do that. And I don't know if that was intentional, but it certainly was not something that I would have done if I'd been prosecuting this case. I would have, since their case basically boils down to he fired shots he didn't need to fire, my case would have been oriented toward proving that it was the shots that he didn't need to fire that caused the death. But they didn't do that either. Now, the other thing that I think just makes absolutely no sense here and is almost comical, it's almost like the thing where you stand in a dark room and you put a flashlight underneath your chin so you cast this shadow and then you talk in a deep voice to get the message across. What is this with picking up the microphone and saying, "Murder begins where self-defense ends"? Oh, give me a break. Now, that's the kind of line that you could certainly use, and it might actually be effective, but doing it in that dramatic way, I think it really limits the impact of both the rhetoric as well as diminishing the credibility of the person who's doing the argument. So now let's move on to the next issue that I have with the state's closing argument.
that the state will not allege that Mr. Rudolph did not have a right to be upset that night. You will see as we go through the presentation that there will not be an allegation that it's ever okay for people to just show up to their house in the middle of the night. It's not illegal, but I could see, everybody could see, how that would make somebody upset. I want to start with what started the calls to law enforcement that day.
I had to boost the audio on the section where she is playing these gunshots for the jury because her audio on that was very, very inaudible, at least on the video, and I suspect it was probably difficult even for the jury to hear. One would think that if you were going to play that audio, that you would play it through the speakers that the jury could hear from, but apparently this young lady is not up to date on her technology and did not have somebody pipe the audio in the appropriate way. But here's the bottom line. She gets up there and she says, well, gosh, she has a right to be mad. But you notice what she doesn't say is these people brought guns, because she wants to ignore the guns, right? Even though there's evidence that there were guns there in the people who came to attack, even though there's evidence out there now that they came specifically to, if not kill him, at least really hurt him badly. I won't use the words that they used. But she's glossing over that, saying, well, gee, these 4 people just came to his house at midnight, and that might make you upset. No. What tends to make people upset is when somebody comes to the house at midnight, bangs on the door, and when you open the door and say, what's up, somebody punches you in the left eye. That's the kind of thing that makes people really upset. But even if that was not the only thing that happened, which clearly it wasn't, that alone should be something that she should have addressed. You always want to address, before the other side does, the weaknesses in your case. You want to go in and say, look, should these guys have gone in there? No. Are we upset about the fact that we've got a pack of liars that have to provide testimony here to you? No, we are not happy about having those folks do that. But that's the evidence that we have, and we're going to stand behind it. Instead, what she does is she gets up and she's relying on the audio of the gunshots to make her case. And you'll hear, if you listen to the entire closing argument, which we're not going to have time to do here, if you listen to the entire closing argument for the defense, that's one of the things that they state. Look, they're just relying on the fact that there were 39 shots fired. And I tend to agree, 39 shots is extreme, but then again, other than a couple of occasions where I have sort of been close to mortal peril, I cannot imagine what it's like to be facing 2 guns pointed at you in a car coming towards you. And so I can understand why you would want to shoot until the threat was really gone. And that, I think, is exactly what he did. But it's interesting to me to note that the things that she is omitting from her discussion are the things that really hurt her case. When what she could have done is she could have said, look, I wish we did have a video. I wish we had a video that showed everything that happened. I wish that the police had done a better job of policing up the area and finding things that they should have found. The purpose of going through the evidence and getting the weak stuff out of the way before you get to the hard stuff is to make sure that you've discussed it so they can't say you've ignored it, and that you've had an opportunity to give them a reasonable explanation for why the evidence is the way that it is. And again, it did not appear to me that she did that in that segment. And again, it's one of those things where you're losing credibility when you refer to this as just 4 guys coming over to say mean things, when in fact everybody knows from the documented texts that they were going over there to do great violence.
Justifiable use of deadly force is the instruction that you will likely spend a lot of time on. So I'll talk to you about it here. It reads, Travis Rudolph was justified in using deadly force if he reasonably believed that such force was necessary.
One of the things that most lawyers do when they close a case is they go through some of the instructions that will help their case. And I think that the real issue here that she's trying to make is that it was unnecessary for him to defend his life, and that it wasn't self-defense, that it was somehow him just going out to try to get revenge for getting hit in the eye. Again, I don't think that that is a particularly useful way to go about prosecuting this case. And her continued discussion of this jury instruction it's simply not very well done. And I think that when you get into it, you can see that for the most part, she is trying to emphasize things about Travis Rudolph and about the situation that have really been adequately explained by the defendant and that I think will resonate with the jury. So now let's take a look at what happens when the defense gets its chance to come up and tell you what their theme of the case is. Now, it's pretty clear what the prosecution's theme is, right? He just overreacted and he just started killing people willy-nilly. Well, that's not the way that the defense handles this case. And before we get to that, I want to talk a moment about case theming. One of the things that lawyers often do is they hold focus groups. And one of the things that they do is they ask questions about, what would you think if we presented it this way? Or a lot of times they'll present it in several different ways, and they'll do 3 or 4 different closing arguments to see which closing argument really ties things together best for their mock juries. And what you have here is I think it probably has been focus grouped. If it hadn't, I would be amazed. I suspect it has been tailor-made to this case, and especially when it comes to the way things happened here. The case theme, in case you'll have trouble picking this up, for the defense is, this is ridiculous. They did a shoddy job. They didn't gather enough evidence to determine whether it was self-defense or not. And because they didn't make their case, you have to acquit. That is, in a nutshell, what the theme is here. So let's take a listen to how the defense attorney begins with his closing statement.
And good afternoon, members of the jury. Hell has no fury like a woman scorned. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. Great argument by opposing counsel, but I forgot to talk to you about the facts of the case, about what the witnesses said, about Detective Vandal and her lack of investigation. I didn't know any better. I was watching an episode of The Sopranos. Just the names changed. Somebody disrespected a mobster's daughter, and they went to go whack him. They go kill him. That's what this case really is. Not just the video that shows you what it shows you. Of course it doesn't lie, but it doesn't show you the whole story. At the moment of truth, you can't see who's in that car and what they're doing or not doing. You'll never know. It's impossible. State can argue all they want. They weren't there. Shameful that you didn't get to see the real evidence in this case. It's a shame that nobody cared.
Notice what he did here, which is what I mentioned before. He said, she didn't talk to you about the evidence. She didn't talk to you about what the witnesses said. What she talked about really was the number of shots that were fired and that sort of thing. I think that's an exceptionally good way to start out. You say, hey, she made a great argument if you ignore the facts. And arguments don't win cases. Facts win cases. And that's what this defense attorney knows. And that's why he is working very hard to get all of that information up there in front of the jury. Now, in the course of doing this closing argument, at various stages, he's going to get hit with objections. He isn't even going to look over at the judge or the prosecutor. He's just going to keep going. And even though the judge sustains several of these objections, it doesn't throw our guy off. He basically keeps punching, and he keeps, with all of the body blows, saying basically, the cops screwed this up. Let's watch.
These guys were lying. Her incompetence would show. Either way, it shows. Either way. It's ridiculous. This is not Sherlock Holmes. This is Barney Fife. I'm sorry if I'm using old terms from shows, maybe RFD, but this is crazy. Palm Beach County, one of the most wealthiest counties in America. A 10-minute interview. We'll ask him what happened. And that's fair? That's fair to Mr. Rudolph? Arresting him at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning? With 2 10-minute interviews and shell casings and not give a damn about what really happened?
And here we are with not really give a darn about what happened. In other words, he's saying the cops had already made up their mind. The heck with an investigation. We got our message. We know what we want to do. That's not the way an investigation is supposed to work. You're supposed to work from the facts out to the suspect, not from the suspect out to the facts. In other words, you don't throw away facts counter to the timeline just because they hurt your case. You have to explain them. You have to adjust for them. And that's what the cops here did not want to do. And he's wise to point this out to the jury.
And other police officers, as you've seen in this case, I'm not blaming all the cops. Most of the cops just did what they were told. But this lady was the captain of the show. And she didn't give a damn for whatever reason. Either she wanted to convict him and get a notch on her belt because she's a new cop. Oh, I got a celebrity. I got a former NFL player. I'm not going to give the jury any evidence to show I was wrong. Come on. This isn't Russia. It's not fair. It's not fair to anyone. Most of all, it's not fair to you all because you didn't see. How would it hurt if someone went back even? Even if you buy the excuse, well, I didn't look behind the fence because I had no evidence of guns. She ignored the hand. You don't need a doctor to tell you that. That's common sense. That hand could have been holding a gun. Why do I have to bring it up? That's her job. The crime scene people told you that they saw that and they said it could have been a gun. The lead detective is either completely stupid or a complete liar. Or both. Why didn't she even look at that? Why?
And again, body blow after body blow, striking that detective, saying you didn't look for the gun, you didn't even try to find out if there were guns. And we're going to get to the point here in a minute where we talk about the witnesses and how they lied.
We maintain he was acting in self-defense. He is a hero to his mom and his brother. But there may be some unanswered questions. Why? Because no one searched. No one searched the path. Is his life worth a car drive down the path? Just to look. Is anything thrown out of the car? The next day they knew there was a gun. They knew it that night, actually. That morning. They heard the guy with the dog. McMichael, Agent McMichael. Thank God for Agent McMichael. Thank God. Because you wouldn't even know Tyler had a gun because he lied to the police. I'm hurt. I'm injured. I can't do this. It's not what the paramedic said. I'm not saying the guy wasn't injured. Of course he was. He was sitting upright. He had all his faculties about him. He never mentioned to the police he had a gun. Then he goes to the hospital. You think these trained detectives are going to question somebody when they're under anesthesia or medication that they don't know what they're talking about? Of course not. He doesn't even tell the next officer there was a gun. And his 2 friends lied. That 10-minute interview, which is absurd, never went back again because she didn't want anything to hurt her case. But now the truth's starting to come out. Y'all saw it a little bit. A glimpse of what she did or didn't do. That 10-minute interview, neither one of us had guns. Nobody in our car had guns. That's what they said. Is that true? Is that the evidence in this case? And you heard from Tyler Robinson, who's actually a multi-time perjurer who's never been charged for saying, I didn't remember in a hearing under oath in front of this court And they give him a free ride. For that too. A free ride for lying over and over and over just so they can protect Detective Vandalin and win this case.
So to me, that is the absolute best part of this closing argument. You have these people who went over to the house with guns to do violence, and the state ignores it completely. And they don't even look for guns. They don't look for a rationale for why Travis Rudolph would want to defend himself. Instead, what they do is they tailor their case so that they're not going to be disturbed by anything that conflicts with the belief that they already have. There is a word for this in the psychological lexicon. It's called confirmation bias. What you have here is you have a detective who made up her mind who the guilty party was early on, Travis Rudolph. And because she knows that Travis is the bad guy here, she tailors her entire investigation, such as it is, to Travis Rudolph. And if the state wins, I think it will be a miracle. But if they lose, the only person really that is to blame here is the detective who did this investigation. And I suppose maybe a little bit the prosecutor, who starts off by saying this isn't about domestic violence, when in fact it's about a screaming woman and text saying we're sending people over to kill you. You know, it really is not, like he said, it isn't Sherlock Holmes. There's plenty of evidence here, but there's only evidence if you look. There's only evidence if you find it. And if you don't find it, well, again, you fail to do the investigation, then the jury doesn't have the information that they need. And under our system, if the jury doesn't have the information that they need to be confident beyond a reasonable doubt that Travis Rudolph did not act in self-defense, then they have to acquit. So we'll have to see what the jury comes back on. Hopefully this will release after or before the jury reaches its verdict. We'll just have to see. But I appreciate you guys who followed along on this case. I'm sorry I didn't get to it early in the case. I think it would have been an interesting one to look at some of these witnesses on. I do think that, again, I'm stating my bias up front, and again, I'm saying I believe that this is probably a defense verdict because I believe the guy is factually innocent. But we'll have to wait and see what a jury says, and we're going to respect the jury's verdict in this case. So, thank you very much for watching. If you have the opportunity today, go out and do something nice for somebody. And, you know, if you haven't already subscribed to this channel and you like the content here, I would really appreciate it if you would subscribe. Thanks again. Have a marvelous day, and we'll catch you down here at the beach next time. If you like this video, here are a few others you might try, and don't forget to subscribe. Have a terrific day, guys.